All right, so we're doing live streaming. Let's begin our webinar. Okay. Hello, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. I hope everyone is doing well today. Welcome to the Public Forum Series 76, or International Webinar, Intellectuals and Global Polycrisis. Are they a problem or a solution? This event is organized by Let's Talk, or Let's Talk About Sex and Sexualities, in collaboration with the Department of Social Anthropology, University of Sumatra Utara, the Ethnographic Research Center, or ERC, of Faculty of Social and Political Sciences, FISIP, University of Sumatra Utara, or USU, and the Indonesian Anthropological Association, North Sumatra Regional Branch. I am Ira. I am the host of today's webinar and also representing the organizer team for today's event. On behalf of the organizer, I would like to extend our appreciation to all of the speakers, Professor Rino, Professor Connell, Dr. Afif, Mbak Soraya, and Mbak Kamala Chandrakirana, Mbak Nana, and also all of the attendees joining of the webinar today, and also for those watching YouTube through YouTube channel of Let's Talk, because we're live streaming on YouTube. Okay, so without further ado, let's kick off our webinar today by listening a remark by the Dean of Faculty of Social and Political Sciences, or FISIP, University of Sumatra Utara, Dr. Hatta Rido, SOS, MSP. Dr. Rido, or Pak Hatta, you have a maximum 5 minutes to deliver your remark. So please welcome Dr. Hatta Rido.
Still. Okay, good morning, ladies and gentlemen, distinguished our panelists, moderator, researcher, lecturer, and all the participants. It is both an honor to address you today on a matter that weighs heavily on the future of our societies and our planet. The role of intellectual in the context of the global polycrisis. The question we are grappling with is not merely academic, it is one that holds profound implications for how we, as a global community, confront the complex, interconnected challenges of our time. Today, we will examine the role of intellectuals in shaping public discourse, in addressing the polycrisis, and in fostering the kind of critical thinking that is essential for navigating this increasingly complex world. We will also explore the tension between intellectualism and action, between theory and practice, and the potential for intellectuals to bridge the gap between thought and tangible change. As we engage in this conversation, let us remember that intellectuals are not a monolith. They are diverse in their approaches, ideologies, and methods. Some may focus on policy, others on culture, and still others on technology. Yet, all have the capacity of contribute to a more just, sustainable, and, and, and resilient world if they are willing to listen, to collaborate, and to engage with the urgency of the moment. In the coming hours, we will hear from a distinguished panel of speakers, each offering their unique insight into the role of intellectual in the context of the polycrisis. And to all of our distinguished speakers today, your contribution have been equally enriching. Each of you has brought something special to the table, and we feel incredibly fortunate to have had the opportunity to hear from such remarkable individuals. I encourage you to approach this discussion with an open mind, to challenge assumption, and to think critically about how we can collectively move, move forward. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Rido or Pak Hatta for conveying your wonderful remark. So let's move to the next agenda, which is the core of our webinar today. This is a discussion session, will be led by a moderator. And before we start the discussion, so I will introduce a little bit about our moderators today, which is Dr. Zulkifli Lubis MA. He is the chair of the Indonesian Anthropological Association, or Asosiasi Anthropologi Indonesia, or AAI, North Sumatra Regional Branch. He's also lecturer in the Department of Anthropology, Faculty of Social and Political Sciences, FISIP, University of Sumatera Utara, or USU, Medan. So I'm handing over moderation of the forum to moderator Bang Zul or Dr. Zulkifli Lubis, and to facilitate the forum or the discussion. So over to you, Bang Zul, please.
Okay, thank you very much, Mbak Ira. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the international webinar on intellectuals and the global polycrisis. My name is Zulkifli Lubis, and I am going to be the moderator. Why do we join to this virtual public forum? We are now living in the global polycrisis era. We are confronted with increasingly diverse and complex crises. Minor crises no longer exist. Instead, we now face interconnected crises that influence one another at local, national, regional, and global levels, creating what can be called a multi-dimensional or global polycrisis. We can observe how various crises, for instance, geopolitical conflicts, economic distress, ecological and climate crisis, and the recent COVID-19 pandemic interact in ways that amplify their effects, creating complex and often unpredictable challenges that significantly impact our everyday life. So, critical reflection is essential for understanding and recognizing these crises as intertwined and complex phenomena. Take an example of the ecological and climate crisis. While many view the environmental and climate crisis as a real threat to the future of human life, many still perceive it as a myth or a fabricated hoax. What are the reasons for this conflicting perspective? To what extent do these contradictory views reflect the role of knowledge and the individual behind that knowledge in discussion about climate change? What is the role of intellectuals in the global polycrisis? Are they a problem or a solution? This webinar will discuss these issues. This forum will focus on several critical issues or questions related to intellectual and crisis. How do we understand and conceptualize the global multidimensional global polycrisis? What is the relationship between intellectual and crisis? How and why do intellectuals become involved in or even exacerbate the crisis? How and why can intellectuals serve as a part of the solution to the crisis? And how should civic and public education be approached during a crisis to foster an awareness of the crisis and encourage critical attitudes toward the various issues that contribute to it? So, we have four distinguished speakers to discuss these critical issues today. They have already joined us in this Zoom meeting room, probably. I want to greet the first speaker, Professor Raewyn Connell from Australia. Hi, Prof. Raewyn, are you with us? Okay. The second speaker is Professor Joshua Rino from the USA. And the third, Kamala Chandrakirana, MA. And the fourth, Dr. Suraya Afif, both from Indonesia. Okay. Now I'm going to lead our discussion for the next 2 hours. And you, all the speakers, will talk for around 80 minutes, meaning that a speaker will talk for a maximum of 20 minutes. I remind you 5 minutes before your time ends. After the 4 speakers have presented their topics, we'll have a discussion session for about 30 minutes. For your information, our audience come from various backgrounds. They are students and lecturers from more than 25 universities in Indonesia, students from universities in New Zealand, the Philippines, India, and Malaysia, the members of research institution, members of the Indonesian Anthropological Association, social activists, civil society organization, and also independent scholars. So all participants can ask question later. If you have any question, you can drop them or type them in the Q&A room, and I will read them for you. Okay, can we go to the first speaker? Now I am going to invite Professor Raewyn Connell. Hi, Professor Raewyn. Are you with us? Hello? Hello? Prof. Connell?
Okay, yes.
Okay,
Okay,
thank you.
can you hear me?
Okay.
Good.
Yes, I can hear you. Okay, I will read your profile. Dr. Raewyn Connell is an Australian feminist sociologist and Professor Emerita at the University of Sydney. She is best known internationally for her studies on masculinity. Since the 60s, she has been concerned with the politics of intellectual life, gradually developing a sociology of intellectuals that focus on the labor process of knowledge formation and circulation. In her book, Tertiary, she discussed intellectuals and social theories from the global periphery and explores paths toward knowledge, democracy, and what on our scale. Yeah? So, based on her bio, our topic on intellectuals and global crisis is undoubtedly her expertise. I think so. So, right, Professor Connell, you have 20 minutes to present your paper. So, please, time is yours.
Thank you very much, and thank you for the invitation to join this discussion, which I think is a very important one. I want to speak first about the nature of the crisis that we are dealing with. Secondly, about the nature of intellectuals. And thirdly, about the relationship between the two. So to start with what we call global polycrisis, it seems to me there are 2 levels to this crisis. One is what we see visibly, if you like, on the television news or hear and see in our internet feed on a daily basis. And to me, there are 2 key parts of the immediate visible crisis. One is the war on populations, or wars on populations that are now happening in different parts of the world. So we have every day news of effectively the massacres that are happening in Gaza and now in Lebanon as well. Not on our news now, but not long ago were the massacres and expulsion of population from Rakhine province in Myanmar, the Rohingya people. We hear of massacres and population displacement in Sudan, in Africa. We hear of the bombardment of civilians by high-tech weapons in Ukraine. And that, of course, is only the current version of a series of military conflicts that have been happening. And we also get pretty regularly information about a worldwide destruction of environment and disturbance of the balances between humans, human life, and the natural world that we live in. So we hear news of deforestation, which happens, I know, in Sumatra, happens in Australia too, on a very disturbing scale. We hear news of out-of-control fisheries, which are destroying the world's fish populations in an unsustainable way, and thus reducing the food resources that our population will need in the next generation. We hear news of new forms of pollution. Plastic pollution is choking our rivers and oceans. The air pollution, that's certainly a problem in my home city of Sydney. And behind the air pollution, of course, the whole enormously developing crisis of climate change, producing storms, flooding, sea level rise that has the potential to destroy human societies in the Pacific Islands already. So those are the visible signs of a deep-seated crisis. But below the level of daily news and weekly news about horrifying things that are happening in the world are the conditions that are producing these kinds of events. So the economists who have been studying the distribution of income and other resources tell us that in the last generation, in most parts of the world, in most parts of the world, economic inequality has been rising. Economic equality has been reduced. The political scientists look around the world today and see a rise in the authoritarianism that is growing in politics, the authoritarian, racist and nationalist movements that have just come to power in the United States, that have come to power in parts of Europe as well, and are now a significant force in other parts of the world too. And with them, of course, the rise in the levels of lying about the world, of untruth about such things as climate and violence, the attacks on science that have escalated quite remarkably in the last generation. And of course, in a number of areas, in a number of dimensions, the decline of human rights regimes. So we're seeing a number of manifestations of toxic economic, political, legal changes, which reflect, I think, the growing power in the last generation of groups of oligarchs, of super rich billionaires, multimillionaires, and the corporations, the transnational corporations, which account for much of their wealth. We see with peoples like Musk in the United States or Gautam Adani in India, how enormous wealth does not go with responsibility towards the world, towards the natural environment, or towards the people who gave those people their wealth. the workers of the world who've actually produced the actual wealth. So there are social conditions which lie behind our sense of urgency and crisis in the daily news. And I will come back to that in a moment. But I now want to turn to intellectuals and ask, how do we define them? How do we understand intellectuals as a group? My short definition of intellectuals is that they are the groups who are capable of autonomous thought. They are people with intellectual skills, with the capacity to analyze data, to develop theory and interpretation, to put different pieces of information together in larger wholes. That is a skill which can be developed with practice, but is often very much associated with advanced training in the universities. So that's what I mean by intellectuals, and that can be materialized, if you like, among quite a range of different groups: scientists, researchers in the humanities and social sciences, as well as the natural sciences, designers, including, of course, computer world designers, but architects and the like, members of professions who use the results of research, such as medical professions, policymakers who use knowledge to set public policy, and the creatives, the novelists, the artists, the playwrights, and so forth, who change our visions of the world. And what seems to me very important and often missing in discussions of intellectuals is the fact that much of the intellectual work in our world today is not highly individualistic at all, but is collective, is done by groups of researchers, groups of engineers, groups of designers, and so forth, working in places like universities, like research and development institutes, collaborating through the internet, working often in the corporate world as well, but sometimes certainly still working individually and separately. But what matters most, I think, for the impact of intellectuals on the world is our capacity for collaboration, our capacity for cooperation, and that means cooperative work among intellectuals always presumes equality in argument and authority in terms of the advancement of knowledge or the development of new ideas. Our capacity for critique, which means not taking knowledge or doctrine that we are immediately given, but always examining it and potentially going beyond what is normally assumed to be true. And finally, our capacity to link internationally, which this seminar in itself illustrates. That, I think, is part of the working life of most intellectuals in the university world, which of course I know best, being an academic myself, but is also part of the lives of intellectuals in mass media and in other institutional settings. So we collectively, as intellectuals, do have assets for moving the world. We do not come innocently to the encounter with the world's crisis. There are definitely things that we can do. So that brings me to my third theme, our relationship as intellectuals to the global crisis. The first thing I have to say, and I thank the Dean for his introductory remarks, and I agree with what he has said, our capacities can be used in complicity with the power holders of the world who are driving the crisis. And that can happen, I think, in two main ways. One, intellectual work is necessary for the technology of destruction. And the most famous case of that, of course, is the nuclear physicists who produced the atom bomb, produced the ideas, at least, for the atom bomb. And that has caused great agony, of course, among natural scientists ever since. It's worth remembering that behind the physicists, behind the researchers who designed the atom bomb, was the whole military and industrial apparatus, the logistics, if you like, which brought the bomb into existence as an actual weapon. And then, of course, the political mechanisms which caused it to be dropped. And those points apply, of course, to other weapons systems, such as the ghastly weapons systems that we are now seeing in the struggles in Ukraine and in Gaza. The second way in which intellectuals can be complicit with the crisis and with the power holders who are driving the crisis is by producing what I would call the ideologies of entitlement. The ideologies which allow power holders to feel legitimated and to claim the support of the other people they need to make the destruction happen. So I'm thinking there about the intellectuals who produce racist ideas, who produce neo-colonialism, in effect, who produce an ideology of uncontrolled economic growth, which is, of course, the main institutional force behind environmental destruction at the moment. And there are many people doing this. This is not just a few bad apples in the intellectual orchard. This is also institutionalized, and that is a crucial problem for us. But given the definition of intellectuals as people who are capable of autonomous thought, which can be used for evil purposes, then opposition to destruction is also always possible for intellectuals. And we do have our intellectual heroes who illustrate the capacity for oppositional thinking, for critical thinking. And I'm thinking here of, for instance, novelists like Pramudia Anandatur, social scientists, human scientists like Noam Chomsky in the United States, a very great linguist who turned to critique of the horrifying wars being waged by the United States or with US weapons. I'm thinking of people like the African philosopher Achille Mbembe, who's written magnificent work on racism, on neo-colonialism, and on the human consequences of those forces. So we do have examples of deeply felt and
excuse me, Prof. Connell,
yes.
you have 5 minutes left, Mr. Connell.
Thank you. Thank you.
Professor
Good.
Connell, yes. Okay, thank you.
Yes.
5 minutes more.
So yes, we have our examples, if you like, available to us of people who have committed themselves to important work of the kind which we need much more of. Now, these are individuals, and however famous they are, there are limits to what individuals can do, and there are many fields of research and design and intellectual work where advances can only be made on a collective basis through teamwork, through institutional work. And bringing that kind of intellectual work into relationship with social movements which are confronting the crisis, such as the peace movement, such as the women's movement, such as the environmental movement, that is difficult. It is difficult for us to do as intellectuals working in institutions, but it is also vital for us to do, to use our skills and capacities to assist those social movements and to, so far as we can, help them to decide their directions. In that work, in intellectuals' work for social movements, it's very important for us to preserve our intellectual autonomy, which gives us, if you like, cultural power. Progressive movements in the past have made mistakes in that area. The communist movement, for instance, half a century ago, in fact, more than that, became authoritarian in its dealings with intellectuals, and therefore that was one of the things which killed it. One of the things we can do using our skills is actually to document the crisis, to keep pushing, to demonstrate what is happening, to demonstrate why and how it is happening, and to help design pathways beyond the situation that we're in now. So that is proper intellectual work. It's work that only we can do, and it's work that is helpful to social movements in their large-scale struggle. And the more we can speak to large audiences about those issues, about the documenting of the crisis and thinking of pathways forward, the better. So we also need to work on outreach, on moving beyond talking to each other as intellectuals to speak to large audiences. It is, I think, a public part of our teaching function. As academics, we're familiar with teaching. That's a large part of our everyday job. But we need also to become comfortable with other forms of connection, mass communication, teaching through the internet, and so forth, in less formal contexts too. The last task I want to suggest, and I'll end with this point, given our capacity for thinking autonomously and for theorizing and for thinking beyond the given, for thinking critically, we can also think beyond the crisis. We can think and we can offer ideas about the world we could have, the world that could be brought into existence beyond the mess that we have today. In other words, there is a utopian dimension in intellectual work that is, in fact, if you like, implicit in intellectual work, by which we can bring to the surface and make part of public discussion. And I think that is a crucial creative contribution that we can make to the current situation to help people think beyond the current situation that we are all in. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Professor Connell. You speak on time, yeah? Okay, to all participants, you can use our facilitation for interpretation, yeah? You can use English or Indonesia. Please choose in the Zoom picture. So we come to the next speaker, Mrs. Kamala Chandrakirana, MA. I would like to read your profile first. Kamala Chandrakirana is an independent scholar, social justice, and human rights defender, a member of the Board of Trustees of Indonesia for Humanity, or IKA, and chair of the National Commission on Violence Against Women from 2004 to 2009. All right, Ms. Kamala Chandrakirana, or Mbak Nana, it is your time to present your work. You have 20 minutes, please. still mute.
Hello.
Okay, thank you.
Yes.
Yeah.
Thank you, Bang Zul,
Yeah.
for this opportunity. Good morning from Jakarta. It's a privilege to be in this forum for an issue that is really the urgency of our time. I want to, before I start, I want to say thank you to the interpreters, Aida and Denny, who are my good friends, who's making this all accessible to everyone. And Professor Connell, thank you so much for starting with such a clear vision of where we are now, but also with ideas about how to move forward. We have many of your ideas resonate with me, and you will see just how hopefully we're all aligned so that we know exactly where we need to go. I'd like to share my a brief PowerPoint just to help me organize my sharing here. Is this okay? Yeah, can everyone see this?
Yes, it's
Okay.
good, ma'am.
Thank you. Yes, I'd like to follow on actually with Professor Connell's discussion with us about the need to really reimagine the intellectual. And my particular concern here is that the global polycrisis actually has very real local footprints. And that's why we are really called upon to rethink about who we think are the intellectuals of our time. Let me just, sorry, I'm trying to get to the next one. Okay. I wanted to just make sure that we have a reference on what is the global polycrisis. I saw two references, one from 2022 from the Cascade Institute, and another, we had a World Economic Forum Global Risk report on 2023. The key thing about the way the global polycrisis is described is that it is a crisis in multiple global systems that are interacting with each other, producing harms greater than the sum of those crises. So that, I feel, is a very important element in our effort to understand why is a polycrisis different than a regular crisis. The interacting and interconnected risks that produce greater harm than the sum of its parts is crucial. What I would like to stress, one of the things that helped me understand just how the interconnection works is this map, interconnections map, that the World Economic Forum Global Risk report produced, which is showing just how the different fields of our of life of the sectors are connected. In this diagram, it helps us to make a mental map of the systemic, how the systemic interconnections are. There's the geopolitical, the crisis in the geopolitical field, including interstate conflicts, state collapse. There's also crisis in the societal dimension in terms of the erosion of social cohesion. I mean, all of these issues, I think Professor Connell provided us with a very clear image of what they look like visibly day to day through our understanding of what's happening around us and in the media. We have also the crisis in the environment, of course, in terms of environmental damage, biodiversity loss, ecosystem collapse, natural resource crisis, disasters, extreme weather, and in terms of the economy, the collapse, the debt crisis, collapse of supply chains, as well as in technology, including cybercrime, cyber insecurity, digital inequality. These are all how this diagram shows how they're all interconnected at the global level. But I'd like to raise here the fact that these interconnections are not merely cross-sectoral. They are traversing across multiple levels of our lives. The global polycrisis has local footprints embedded in distinct contexts and interacting, not just across the sectors, but interacting with complex inflection points and long-standing tensions on the ground. So what I would like to raise in this discussion we have today is to really break out of a dichotomous thinking that the polycrisis is simply a global phenomena, because the global is local and the local is global. Just to illustrate this, how that interconnection between the local, the global, the local, and the national, I just want to give you this little kind of picture of Indonesia being caught, or being, yes, how the, for example, global trade wars between China and the US, the conflicts in the region, whether it's in the South China Sea or in Taiwan within our region, as well as in Palestine and Europe, that these all are playing out also nationally in Indonesia's context. We have the competition between huge corporate oligarchic investments competing in our country in order to win the global trade wars. The new theaters, possible potential theaters of war in our region has made Indonesia a passing through for nuclear submarines that Australia is trying to deploy and use with an eye on China, on the conflict with China. In the meantime, we have our own challenges in terms of geographically being part of the Pacific Ring of Fire, so that the extreme weather that is happening globally is increasing the level of natural disasters that we are facing, given our positionality in the global, in Earth. So in addition to that, we have social issues that we have not, that we are still grappling with and are producing their own crisis in our countries, including the rising inequality in our country, the rise of religious extremist and supremacist views, as well as unaddressed trauma from past human rights atrocities. So these are things that will be interacting with each other, and that we need to better understand how this interplay is happening, so that we are responding both at the local level as well as the global level. If we look further down, we see many parts of the country, I think probably throughout the whole archipelago, where the conflicts and the impacts are so localized, including in Papua, with the rise of food estates being funded by investment from China and at some point from Middle East. We have in Central Sulawesi, another conflict area that is now facing huge environmental impact from a huge nickel plantation factory that's being set up there, and as well as conflicts everywhere. Land conflicts are the largest number of conflicts that we are facing in Indonesia. So from these two slides, I just want to make it clear to us that the global is local and the local is global, and we need a better way to see how they interconnect and influence each other. So my what I would like to bring here is, if the global crisis is played out locally and globally together, we must challenge our own notion of who are all the carriers of relevant and path-breaking knowledge and reimagine the intellectual. I'd like here, as part of my own exploration about, so how do we reimagine the intellectual? I found a paper in my father's archives at home, which is a paper written in 1970. And the title of the paper is about the intellectual in a developing nation. It was a very different context, of course, of that time. He was speaking to an international audience in the US and trying to explain the role of the intellectual during the time of Indonesia's independence and search for its identity as an independent autonomous nation. What was interesting about this paper for me at this point in time is how he approached thinking about the intellectual. It wasn't about a definition, it was about the roles, it was about the imaginings, and about how progress could look like in terms of the role of the intellectual. And I'd like to share with you some of the quotes from that paper. And he also, one other additional point that I'd like to say, which was struck me in that paper, he started by saying he wanted to share his experience as an intellectual in terms of his dilemmas, including with power, and that's why Professor Connell's sharing was resonated with me as well. So in terms of the role, he said, the role of the intellectual in him describing it is to define the problems of their societies in terms of their new sense of purpose, to sharpen the vision of the kind of society they want theirs to transform into, to relate emerging value patterns to changing social realities, to illuminate the road ahead, to identify the pitfalls, and constantly to search out alternative roads, to find the significance of each new development in relation to common goals. So again, this is the role that he's thinking, or he played out, I think, on personally. And there was a section in the paper where he started making imaginings. The intellectual's role harkbacks to the older traditional systems. He's bringing in here the idea of the traditional notions of the intellectual, the role of the prophet, the seer, the sage, the carrier of basic values of society, characterized by a disinterest in power.
Excuse me, Mbak Nana, you have 5 minutes more.
Thank you. And so I don't mean here to say we need to look for a prophet and a seer and a sage, but I think he has, through this quote, inviting us to really expand our notion and look at traditional systems with new eyes. And in terms of progress, any movement forward would have to make use of existing impulses, existing skills, existing values and symbols, and reinterpret traditional values or to rearrange them in new patterns of meaning. So again, this is just a reference that I thought would be good. So I want to say what our challenge is. If we were given that kind of thinking and imagery, we have a challenge that there is systemic inequality, obstructive hierarchies, and chronic disconnects between what we conventionally imagine as intellectuals in highly resourced institutions, many of which are in the global north, with huge assets and globetrotting, having sufficient research money and research assistance to actually carry out large-scale and deep analysis, versus the kinds of new imaginings of the intellectuals at the local level that are actually there also, if we use Professor Connell's definition of autonomous thought, are trying to produce autonomous thought, whether context, sitting around a fire, sitting around on the floor, on the ground, and conversing with elders, using language that are very different, and they're seeking answers to the crisis that they are seeing in their respective communities, and actually would benefit from a dialogue and a enrichment of to be able to make the connections that what's happening locally in their context is connected to larger systems and the global environment. The additional problem we have is that we are entering a new era. Hopefully it's not a long era, but it is a new era of autocrats and oligarchs, and that we have to function and find ways forward within a very, very difficult and complex environment where we are on the weaker part of the totem pole, the hierarchies. How to move forward towards transformative change? I want to share 4 things here for us for a further discussion. One is we need to respect and engage with the wide plurality of knowledge systems, with their respective thinkers and communicators. And one of the organizations or communities that I work with are with women ulama who have their own knowledge system and trying to grapple with what is happening in their communities and in the world. And there are other knowledge systems that just need to be recognized and engaged. Second, we need to recognize and address the critical differences and the obstructive hierarchies in power, resources, access, and risks between the global and the local intellectuals, including due to patriarchy. These hierarchies are propped up by structural and cultural barriers that we need to address. Third is to create open, autonomous, and reciprocal spaces to build grounded and coherent understandings, along with different ways of knowing, including by women and youth. And finally, to defend basic freedoms and human rights in current autocratic and oligarchic context, and build collective protection systems for intellectuals at risk at the global level, national, and local. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Mbak Nana. You have present an excellent ideas about these topics. And now we move to the third speaker. We have Professor Joshua Reno. I invite you. I will read your profile first. Dr. Joshua Reno is a professor of anthropology and director of the graduate program at Binghamton University or State University of New York. You have 20 minutes to present your work, please. Professor Reno.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. This is a great honor. Thank you for Professors Connell and Chandrakirana. I feel completely, I mean, I loved both your presentations. I feel that my presentation is going to be a little bit more miserable sounding. Partly that's because I speak from the context of the United States, where, as was mentioned, we just had a very disappointing election that could be said, you know, if there were an anti-intellectual, it would be Donald Trump. That's the person we just elected president. Anti-intellectual in several senses. Anti-intellectual in that Donald Trump himself, in his comportment, in his behavior, in his attitude, in the way he talks, he has a very low vocabulary. That's not me criticizing him. That's how he talks. He talks in a very simple way. That's been mentioned by many people. He uses small words. He you know, uses abusive language that people who like him enjoy. So he doesn't seem like an intellectual in the way he talks or the way he appears, the way he sounds. Of course, he is a very rich man. He's also anti-intellectual because intellectuals, he, like many authoritarian, you know, candidates, loves to attack. He loves to say, well, intellectuals are terrible, intellectuals are ruining everything, intellectuals are awful. So there is a way in which this was an anti-intellectual election we just had. And you know, and that is troubling as an intellectual, but it's also interesting in several ways. One, there are, as Professor Connell said, there are many intellectuals propping up the Trump and the right in the United States, including, I believe Dr. Connell called them people involved in the ideologies of entitlement, which I liked as an expression. And those include intellectuals in especially social media. I have a prop. My prop is my phone. I hate this thing. And I have to block websites from myself because otherwise I will just spend hours going like this, like all of you, and looking at another video and another video and another video. I have to block myself to protect myself from my own desire for these videos. What videos do I watch before the election and after? It's an intellectual pantomime or an intellectual performance that will be a left-wing commentator in 15 seconds destroying a right-wing commentator. It will be a right-wing commentator in 30 seconds destroying a left-wing commentator. And all of them present themselves as intellectuals. And I mean that because they speak rationally and calmly and seemingly with great acumen and intelligence and grasp of data and a grasp of ideas. They also, you know, see intelligence as being an attack or as being a battle or as being a struggle between an individual who is intelligent and an idiot who is not. And there are endless videos, just not infinite, but certainly millions of videos of clips that people watch constantly, not just me, of someone performing that kind of intellectualness, of performing the intellectual who attacks the idiot and exposes the idiot. And I think that this is in a way the problem. The problem is intellectual has become a joke, or it has become a, better than a joke, it's become a commodity, a thing that you present as a performance. And so there are people on the right and the left whose job is to appear like intellectuals. And I don't mean Noam Chomsky. But I mean, you know, on the right, there are people, Peter Thiel, who most people may know is someone who made money off of PayPal and who's one of the richest men in the world. And he is an architect of the Trump presidency in part because he's one of these billionaires who helped fund it. Peter Thiel started as a right-wing intellectual, not as a venture capitalist. He did that later. He started as a sociologist reading Rene Girard's theories of sacrifice for anyone who's read weird French theory, and wrote papers that were essentially in defense of authoritarianism as part of him becoming this right-wing sort of influencer and selector of presidents. My point is that the right has intellectuals who perform intellectual behavior. The left does too. And the reason I have to stop myself from looking at this is there's a part of me that loves watching short clips of a left-wing person intellectually battling and fighting and attacking some idiot. And I really think that's, in a way, what's the corruption of the intellectual as a public figure. And it's not because it's online. It's because it has been cannily or smartly used by corporations and used by these social media companies, among others, to keep our attention and to get us to follow and track things and to buy things, of course. And we, in our worst impulses about what an intellectual is, meaning an elite who is this singular individual hero who defends truth. That's an Enlightenment idea from the West that goes back centuries. The idea of a and Noam Chomsky is kind of a version of this today, of sort of the intellectual who, against all odds, fights against the forces of darkness and speaks for truth, even if it's unpopular. That's become weaponized, and it's become controlled by so many corporations and so many political parties that now know, Russia does this to defend their war in Ukraine. China does this constantly. There's all these, and the US is doing it. There's countries that are authoritarian or want to do a version of authoritarianism that know how to use the intellectual as a public figure or as a compelling character that makes you like them. I'm not saying that people on the left, like Noam Chomsky, are controlled secretly by some, cabal of rich people. I'm saying that it fits in with a pattern of the kind of idea of the Enlightenment individual who is this singular hero who thinks for themselves. And the idea of thinking for yourself, which is a version of the autonomy of thought, is something that people that believe in hoaxes believe very much. Someone who believes in a hoax, someone who believes in a conspiracy, thinks they are someone who is thinking for themselves, who goes against everyone else in their life who tells them climate change is real. Well, I've done my own research and I know climate change isn't real. I am performing, by the way. And there is a sort of a joy that comes with a conspiracy theorist, a joy that comes with someone who believes in a hoax. And that joy is that they are that singular hero who believes in a truth and is fighting everybody else who doesn't believe that truth. That's a very hard thing to challenge. And you can't challenge it by saying you're not a real intellectual. You can't challenge it by saying you're an idiot, right? That doesn't defeat that person's belief in conspiracies. Right now in America, there are people on the left, people in my family, people I know very well, colleagues, who are really excited about a conspiracy they believe in, that is that Trump stole this election, that they're saying somehow he stole it, Kamala Harris should have won. And then there's people on the right saying, this proves that Trump actually won in 2020. Conspiracies are powerful things to believe, and they make us feel like individual heroes who are autonomous of thought, right? Now, if you're on the left, like I am, you say, oh, all of those people who think that, Trump was elected in 2020, they're idiots, they're pawns. They think they're thinking for themselves, but other people are telling them what to think. But they say the exact same thing about people on the left. So how do you deal with that? The cultural meaning of the intellectual and the cultural meaning of believing in a truth now is so much more complicated than it was 20 years ago, let alone 50 or 100, which is why I'm very pessimistic about being an intellectual. One thing that I would say is that perhaps one way forward is to recognize, and this I very much agree with my colleagues who already spoke, one way forward is to recognize that there are more intellectuals in the world. In fact, as an anthropologist, I tend to think everyone is an intellectual. The difference is that some people are paid to be intellectuals. Some people have the autonomy of action to be intellectuals. All of us can have autonomy of thought, can think for ourselves, but some of us have autonomy of action, meaning we are given the freedom to act on our thoughts. We're given the freedom to do creative and new things. As a professor in a university, I not only have autonomy of thought in a community of people with autonomy of thought, I have autonomy of action because I can turn my thoughts into research projects. I can turn, and because I'm in the global north, as was mentioned, I also can find the resources and the support to do that. But I have the autonomy of action to use my social class and my kind of elitism, if you like, to turn my autonomy of thought into autonomy of action. That's what people lack who are intellectuals in thought all around us, but who don't have the potential in their lives to turn that into actions. I say that because people believing in hoaxes and conspiracies have autonomy of thought in a sense. And some of them, indeed, will spend hours on the internet doing their own research, not just listening to what other people say. One of the reasons that conspiracies become popular is people start doing their own research and inventing new crazy theories based on very little understanding of the complexity of the data, or jumping into something I don't truly understand. But there is a kind of intellectual activity there because they're thinking creatively, they're thinking outside of what everyone else tells them is true, and they're looking over actual material and trying to combine ideas. They're trying to connect the dots, right? And solve a puzzle. I have a brother who's a pastor, who's a Christian pastor, who I love, but he's very conservative. And he was convinced that Barack Obama was born in Africa and that his birth certificate was fake. And my brother, who has no expertise on birth certificates, sent me email after email using his belief that this shows that Barack Obama's birth certificate is fake. It's definitely fake. Look at this. Look at that. My brother doesn't know anything about birth certificates, but he does know how to do his own research online that gives him that is filled with an intellectual passion that I also have. My wife likes to say that my brother and I are very alike. The difference is I'm in a university and he's in a Christian church, and he's a pastor in his church, and I'm doing intellectual activity as a professor in my college. But the two of us are very similar in how passionate we get about researching things. So what do I tell my brother? Do I just tell him he's an idiot? Do I tell him he doesn't know anything about passports? It's a hard thing to do. What I think we should do is acknowledge first that there aren't just intellectuals in universities or intellectuals who are social elites, but that everyone is an intellectual, but that some people have no power to turn their intellectual thought into intellectual action. And so what I would say is what intellectuals need to do, my intellectual brother is circulating hoaxes, someone put in the chat. Yes, to me. What I think we need to find ways to do is to increase the sense of power that people have in various places who believe conspiracies, not argue with them about conspiracies, but teach them how to do real research or teach them how to create real social action locally, indeed, and to start in a local sense. I think it's easier to have real conversations in person with people at a local level than it is to try to debate someone online who you don't know, who you're never going to agree with. So I think getting people more power at a local level to turn their autonomy of thought into autonomy of action, to creatively do that. And it doesn't have to be by doing intellectual research, like collecting data. It can also be, indeed, as Professor Connell said,
Excuse
and
me,
others.
Professor, you have 5 minutes more.
Thank you. It can also be creative. It can be writing. It can be poetry. It can be art. There are many ways that people meditate on their lives and think critically on their lives. And one of the most common ways is through art. My own research now, which I'm also finding pessimistic, I'm looking a little bit on video games and gamer communities, which tend to be pretty right-wing and pretty conspiratorial and pretty creepy. But they're people doing creative intellectual activity. One of the reasons the people who play video games get very defensive about video games is because they have intellectual passion about video game playing. The reason that religious communities get defensive about people who they feel like are attacking their religion is partly that their religious lives give them intellectual passion and give them intellectual joy. Because if you do, I was raised Catholic. I know what Bible study means. I'm no longer Catholic, but I knew as a child that doing Bible study was an intellectual exercise. Doing Bible study as a child helped me learn how to do philosophical study later in life, because they're very similar intellectual exercises. You're combining ideas, you're looking for references, you're innovating with texts. And I think, thinking about communities that seem anti-intellectual as intellectual, changing our understanding of what an intellectual can be and what an intellectual community can be a way, again, I'm not optimistic, of trying to create new coalitions of people, all of whom want to live autonomous lives in thought and action, but need to get past binaries that we've taught separate us. My favorite intellectual of the 20th century is James Baldwin, who was a novelist also, who wrote novels as well as wonderful essays, who never went to college, and yet who debated successfully the conservative intellectual William F. Buckley at Cambridge on the question of race in America. And that's because James Baldwin learned in his religious community how to be an effective public intellectual. I don't think that only happens from university life. I think universities can be important places for that. But I think we have to see intellectuals around us, and I think we need to find ways to give them power, not just teach them how to think. Thanks.
Okay, thank you very much, Professor Reno. Now we come to the last speaker. This Dr. Suraya Afif. I will read your short profile first. Dr. Suraya Afif is the chair of the Indonesian Anthropological Association, or AAI, and an associate professor in the Department of Anthropology at the Faculty of Social and Political Science, University of Indonesia. Mbak Suraya, you have 20 minutes. Please present your work.
Thank you for inviting me in this very, very important discussions. I think we in Indonesia also very, very right now is the discussion is actually everywhere. I found I participate in a lot of discussions, and this has become a very important topics in Indonesia as well. So I also enjoy the other the three speakers before me. I'm absolutely agree, and I think I would like to try to convey what I thinking about these issues. Let me share my presentation. Where is my presentation? Okay. How can I wait? Is it possible? Okay. Can I already? Yeah. Okay. Yes. Okay.
Yes.
Yes. Okay. Thank you. So basically, I would like to again, talk more. Actually, maybe hopefully in it contributes what the others already say. What is actually the intellectuals? And the problematizing the image of intellectuals, and then what is the intellectual context in Indonesia? I think Ibu Nana already explained a little bit about the local, actually the Indonesian local and global intellectual is a context. What option to address this crisis? And I would like to address at least. Now, who are the intellectuals? I think this is every debate in Indonesia also talking about what is the Indonesian intellectuals means. Yeah? So there is two words in Indonesia, is intellectual and cendekia, which is each one is actually, in my opinion, sources from, one is non-academic and one is academic, right? And the intellectuals actually has a debate. I mean, like I look at a lot of debates on who are the intellectuals. One of the things that I found, Blackwell Dictionary of Modern Social Thought, say men and women that given society who are yet qualitatively important as a creator of symbols, who process attribute not to be found among, so it's a very small group that can be engaged in arts, sciences, professional, and religions, right? And the other thing that I think is interesting in terms of who are the intellectual from this dictionary is who the person who maintain a critical attitude. Now, that means also in a lot of history, intellectuals often persecuted by the men of power as well as by vested economic interests. I will explain, what is the case in Indonesia. Now, this also say academics or member of profession is not necessarily an intellectual. So intellectual has to be a certain people that can thinking critically, Intellect can also someone from outside academic institutions. One of the scholar who actually published a book, he defines the intellectual in Indonesia refer to university academicians, student activists, journalists, member of non-governmental organization. But things that he doesn't mention is about how independent scholars and thinkers, right? Because I agree with the previous say that the intellectual, it could be found everywhere. It's not just in the institution per se. So, and the second issue that Noam Chomsky actually problematizes is actually the image of intellectual as defenders of justice, confronting power with courage and integrity. But they are not always act that way. So in the history, I fascinated to find, for example, this is 1925, where there is a manifesto of fascist intellectuals by Giovanni Gentili. Yeah? So he's actually intellectual who support Mussolini, yeah? And he's a philosopher and fascist politicians. And the other, group is a manifesto of anti-fascist intellectual by Benedetto Croce, the idealist philosopher, historian, and politicians. So you see, as many as that intellectuals has not homogeneous in terms of thinking, in terms of how they thought about social justice, about power, about integrity. Yeah. So this is important to think that who who are their support, what kind of thinking they convey, to whose perspective, on who's their in their mind, what kind of society that should be they support, authoritarian or democratic or who else, right? So Noam Chomsky is talking about the responsibility of intellectual. So it's this phrase, according to him, is sometimes ambiguous. That is referred to intellect's moral responsibility as decent human beings in a position to use their privilege and status to advance the causes of freedom, justice, mercy, peace, and other sentimental concerns, or does it refer to the role they are expected to play, serving, not derogating, and leadership and established institution? Now, in Indonesia, it's become, important to see the involvement of intellect in politics. Right? I see that also in everywhere, not in Indonesia. So this is questioning the problem of intellect freedom, social responsibility, and their autonomy. So in the modern area, is it the responsibility of intellects to speak the truth and to expose lies? Is there? I mean, previous scholar talking about what happened in the United States, right? That is the extreme debates about left and right. I also follow how they, each side, against the others. This is something that we in Indonesia need to actually reflecting. Yeah? Now, the intellect in Indonesia context is have something challenge, the issue of freedom to maintain critical thinking and the rise of critical question that affects those men and in power. So in Indonesia, this after we have 3 decades of under authoritarians, now in the United States, now is the time they have the situation that tends toward authoritarians, although I still see in United States, because there's a long history of democratic, but now toward authoritarian. In Indonesia, vice versa. We have long history of authoritarian, then become very, started democratic. But unfortunately, in this kind of global that toward authoritarians. Now, so this is something that we have a problem of the issue of independence on university institutions. So the globe toward more toward authoritarians and Indonesia trying to maintain in democratic independence. So then in the university, this become struggle of power. One of the issue, for example, university academics in Indonesia has a status. Some of them are not, but others as a government bureaucrats. So this is the legacy of Suharto era are still continue, which is they still have in academic who are a government bureaucrats. So if you're government bureaucrats, how can you have ability to think critically, autonomy and critical? So the second issue of independence of a university institution is the role of university academics as political. Sometimes they become a political or oligarch consultants, because again, university become a justified for a certain political elites groups, and sometimes the oligarch and the capitals also use in university to support their work. So this is in Indonesia is become an issue right now, and tension within the university is very high in terms of this. And about numerous challenges of academic freedom. That's a result. When we are critical to a certain process in the university, they tend to see us as, a government against the government, a subversive, political subversive. And sometimes they become, seen as not asking critical questions, but as a group of people that against the government. So this is something that happening in Indonesia University. The Intellect Indonesia also have issue of paradigm and ideology, because this is something that I've seen researchers who actually they research for to support corporate interest only, pro-growth without questioning and ignoring the important effect to the environment, the poor, the increasing inequality. Yeah. And the other challenge in Indonesian context is that Indonesia is also follow the what happened in the global context, which is at the beginning we are then considered as a democratic countries, and then become stagnant, declining, now tend toward authoritarian again. Right? And this is unfortunate in the time of also what happening in global context. So you see the intellectual Indonesia, which is very new in terms of the trying to be open, critical. Now it's begin in the time where dealing with the state that tend toward authoritarian again. Now the other challenge that we have, that Indonesia consider research and research funding are among the lowest in the Southeast Asia. So you see why a lot of researchers in Indonesia then tend to be who pay the most. Of course, the pay the most is the one who own money. So this is the other challenge that maybe Bu Nana talk about the difference challenge between countries like Indonesia and country like in Australia or America or Europe. Yeah? That the issue of research and research funding that in Indonesia is the key why a lot of researchers now afraid to talk. Yeah, not that because I'm not saying that they are not critical, but they're very difficult and very afraid to talk openly about something that they see inequality against human rights or discrimination.
Excuse
Now,
me, Bu Suraya, you have 5 minutes more.
Okay, thank you. So as a result of this, influence of oligarch, of, capitals to a lot of project in Indonesia right now from country, undemocratic country. So this is create what we all say, thinking civic space, and also the media. Yeah? So this is, I just mentioned the result of the one of the result about threats against environmental defenders, yeah, increasing threat against those who actually defend environment in Indonesia. I don't think is this only in Indonesia. Increase of cases of strategic lawsuits against public participations, not only against the activists, but against scholars who actually protect or pro-environment or pro-social communities. Yeah? So you can see the increasing influence of extractive industry that actually create conflict, but also support by scholar who support the mining and energy extractive, but against the one who questioning, who advocate to cases that affect local communities. So what option to address this crisis? The only way, I think I agree with all the people, is strengthening the collaboration of intellectuals. I think this is the right times to all intellectual in academics, outside academics, including local thinkers. As an anthropology, I agree that a lot of actually the one who really think critically are not only the one who have university degree. So the other question is critical thinking to different paradigm and ideology. I think this is the time as a role of academic. So we cannot just critical to the paradigm and ideology and discuss it with our student, but also we have to begin to have discussion outside campus as well. Collaboration with individuals and organization that not campus, outside campus. So, and also find various way to convey critical thought to reach out the publics. In Indonesia, I think we cannot avoid engagement with various actors. The other thing is what Sampans call is actually citizen science. This is something actually not new in anthropology, but very new in the science community, which is what is actually involving community to create knowledge, to create scientific knowledge co-production, what they call. So I'm willing to talk about this more. That sometimes the Indonesian thought the academics knows everything, but actually, if we also create collaboration, create what they call co-production of knowledge, this is something that I saw is one of solution that we can promote. I think that is my my talk. I hope that we can discuss more in this in the discussion. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Mbak Suraya. Appreciate your wonderful presentation. And now we come to the next session, that is discussion session. I will not take away all the presentation because the limitation of the time. So the team have collects the question from audience, from participants, from Q&A box. So I'm sorry. I'll read the question. We hope that we summarize the question from the all participants. We cannot see or we cannot read all of them. We summarize the question and then I will read first, and then the speakers will have 6 minutes each to respond the question. So, okay. So the questions come from Hartoyo, Lilanita, Dian Nafi, Oro Supartina, Muba Manihurup, Frans Mangkepro, Adi Wibawa, and Rida Regina. Total 9 questions. We have summarized them to be only 4. Yeah. Okay. The first question How do you see development projects from some developed countries in the West, particularly delivered through NGOs in developing countries? Aren't they contributing to consolidating the power of these rich developed countries and creating more crises? That is the first question. And the second one, how could progress in science and knowledge bring crisis to humanity? How do intellectuals play a role in influencing policymakers with abundant power? What are their rules? What are their rules in electoral politics? What are their rules in a nationalist conflict like in Papua? How to establish a collaboration among global intellectuals while there are differences of ideology among them? And the third question, how intellectuals deal with uneducated who like to spread hoax, and how to deal with political religious groups who have their own arguments. And the last question, how do you respond to the narrative of moral degeneration in some Asian countries, particularly the present drug war of Duterte in the Philippines? Yeah, so there are 4 questions. I invite the speaker to respond. First, from Professor Raewyn, and then Mbak Nana, and the third, Professor Marino, and the last one from Ibu Suraya. Yeah, I think your time now. You have 6 minutes. Please, Prof. Raewyn. Still mute. Please unmute. Sorry, the host read.
Is that right? Good. I think we need 6 days, not 6 minutes, to think about these questions. They deserve serious thought. So these, all we can do is offer some sort of starting points.
Yeah, you can choose which question relevant for you.
Sure. Well, I'll say a couple of words about each of them, though, if I have understood them correctly. First question, asking about the role of intellectuals in rich countries, is that correct? In creating global crisis. And I think that's, absolutely right, that intellectuals performing their functions as managers, as policymakers or policy designers and so forth, and technologists in rich countries have created much of the infrastructure, if you like, of ideas and techniques for power holders in developing countries, and have thus contributed very largely indeed, I think, to the widening of gaps of wealth and power on a global scale. And that's one reason why I don't despair of intellectuals in rich countries. I just think they have a peculiar weight of responsibility to bear. They also are important figures in the struggle. The second question, if I grasped it correctly, is in effect about the irony of good intellectual work, such as one that I mentioned, which actually over time contributes to crisis. And again, I mean, there are ironies and difficulties here. I mentioned the case of the atomic bomb, which started with, intellectuals in their laboratories and offices doing wonderfully creative scientific work about the nature of the atom and the nature of physical reality. And the result was ghastly change. We can't stop the development of science. We now have biological weapons of peculiar horror, which have not very much been used yet, but could be. And there's nothing we can do to stop that. But we can act to prevent such advances being put to evil uses. So we have to be strategic about where progressive intellectuals put their energies, I think. And I know that this is something that many people in the natural sciences, biologists, physical scientists too, whom I have known, have given a great deal of thought to, about how you can turn, if you like, the political significance of the natural sciences around so that it can be used for democratic purposes. And I want to celebrate the mention of citizen science, which is one of the examples of good intellectual work that I mention in my book, The Good University. That is to be celebrated. And it's something that can happen in the social sciences as well as the natural sciences, so that there are enormous democratic potentials in bringing more and more people into the production of knowledge and thinking about its consequences. How we might deal with people who believe in hoaxes, I'm baffled by that myself. So I will have to leave that to others. But I do want to emphasize that intellectuals include religious thinkers. I know there is very interesting, important intellectual work happening in Islamic contexts with rethinking of, and indeed, one might say that the whole Islamic intellectual tradition is a tradition of rethinking. This is certainly something we want to encourage, and which I would like to encourage in Christian theological work too, and some of it is happening. And finally, how do we react to things like the murder campaigns that were set in motion by Duterte in the Philippines? Indeed, that's a shocker from any moral point of view, but to my mind, no more shocking than the murder campaigns carried out with military weapons by belligerent governments and sometimes non-government armed actors too. So to my mind, the response to that is in the work of the peace movement, broadly speaking, the campaign against the diffusion of weapons, whether they're atomic weapons or handguns. There is a lot of wisdom already in hand in anti-violence movements that we can use. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Professor Connell, for your excellent response. And now we invite Mbak Nana to respond to the question. Please, you have 6 minutes.
Thank you, Bang Zul. I just want to emphasize how serious the structural, political, and cultural barriers are that we need to overcome. We cannot begin to do the collaborations, the co-production of knowledge, unless we truly understand how these barriers are functioning and find ways to address them and break away from them. It's unless we do this, we will be our fate will be simply to repeat where and stay where we are and produce, great science maybe in isolation and not really addressing the real demand of our time. So I'd like, I think we need time to understand these barriers. I think we need to have space to check our assumptions and change the way we work, change the way we think about how we want to engage, and break away, open new spaces, explore, and take risks to go into areas that is unknown to us. I'm a secular human rights feminist activist working with religious women ulama who have taught me so much about a way of thinking about the world, and exchanged and collaborated to come up with something that is genuinely authentic and new. And that is a process that took 15 years. It is not going to happen in an instant. We need to begin with the small steps, and we need to be doing it mindful and critical, with a critical mind. Hartoyo's question about the issue of money funding is critical. This is one of the barriers. This is one of the structural impediments that we have, where the fact is the source of money for work on social justice and social change is coming mostly from the global north within their rules of the game, where even when new terms and new programs or framings like localization, support local groups, money are being poured, including by USAID up till this point. It will change, of course. But these localization programs by donors, by international aid organizations, have been carried out without changing the power imbalance between the global and the local. And so you have a phrase that means nothing because it doesn't really provide this autonomous space and the opportunity for us at the local level to define and understand our own agenda and to pursue based on our analysis and our capacity to take risks and to grasp opportunities. The other barrier that we face is a very serious one that Soraya Afif has raised about our national context, in which criminalization, repression, and even simple isolation is going to be the rule of the game, and that we have to do all this under a very damaging environment, political environment. And, I think at this point, we need to learn also from legacies of previous movements. We know what authoritarianism is in Indonesia. We still have the memory of what it is. We know what it is to work under the radar. We know we don't mind that we are not in the public eye, or that we don't become celebrities or we don't become media darlings, but we work on the ground quietly, because I believe that small and quiet work at this particular moment in time is critical. My last point is that we should not be defeated by pessimism. This is our first order of business. We should not be defeated by pessimism. We need to choose hope, and we need to trust our creative energy so that we can actually get forward, move forward. And it's a psychological dimension of this all. We are all feeling very, very depressed and very, very angry about what is happening, but we cannot be defeated by it. And I believe that women and feminists are at the front lines of this. Thank you.
Okay, Mbak Nana, thank you very much for your response. And now we invite Professor Rino to respond to the question. We have 6 minutes.
I'll use 3 minutes. I'll try to be fast. So I love the last statement about choosing hope. I think that's right. I think that's lovely. I think that's part of the utopianism that was described earlier, the kind of utopian aspect of true creative critical thought that I think is lacking in a kind of dark, conspiratorial, authoritarian vision of the world. Has no hope. The only hope is that it'll be saved by some strong leader who destroys people and things. I would just try to answer maybe one of the questions that hasn't been discussed is how to have a conversation with someone who believes a hoax or believes a conspiracy. The only success I've personally ever had is, so the one advantage is that if you don't believe any conspiracies, that means they only believe, if they believe one, they probably don't believe them all. So there's probably a conspiracy you agree on that is wrong, right? So if you can say, you know, I had a debate with one person who told me birds aren't real. It's one conspiracy. The conspiracy is that every bird in the world is secretly a robot that was created by the government to spy on us. And I could not get this person to say that, you know, to believe me that birds were real. I said, could we kill a bird and cut it open? And I'll show you there's no wires. There's just a heart and thing. And it wasn't no, that wouldn't convince them. So then I said, I just started going through other conspiracies. Do you think that climate change is real? Do you think the world is flat? Do you think, and eventually we got to one that they didn't believe. They said, oh, of course the world's not flat. So then I said, okay, how do you know the world's not flat? And then we talked about how we both agreed that the world wasn't flat. And then I tried to sort of shift that into the discussion of birds aren't real, because the same trust that they had in scientists and in reason and in communities that made them think the world was round, they lacked when it came to birds. So I was trying to build a bridge from one to the other. And that was the most success I've ever had. But I don't think you have any success when you tell someone they're stupid or a fool. If you tell someone they're stupid or a fool, that you're not going to have a conversation. So discussions with people who believe conspiracies and hoaxes have to be done in a human way that involves dialogue. That's my own personal thought on that. That's the only thing I'll comment on, because I thought the other answers were good and I can't do better.
Okay, thank you very much, Professor Reno, for your response. And the last one, we invite Bu Suraya to respond the question.
Yeah. So I would like, I cannot, you know, answer one by one. I think I agree that this is need time. But I would like to actually talk to Indonesian audience. Yeah. In Indonesia, sometimes people in Indonesia, and it's not just academics, but a lot of publics love conspiracy theory. I think in US also, yeah, the same, yeah. But the way the Indonesian conspiracy theory is often like this: all the West actually bad, and we are much more superior, yeah, because that come from the context. In the past, we have a colonial time when talking that we are, you know, backward, and now they're trying to vice versa, which is actually we are the superior and all the West is bad. Yeah? The second is what they call local custom, what they call local knowledge is the best to solve all the problem. The modern knowledge is bad so this dividing, it's a lot of things in Indonesia, and now get to another conspiracy, which is all the West are the same, unique, homogeneous, right? There is no progressive intellectual, and not in Indonesia. They say, well, all of us are good, against the West. I have a problem with that kind of knowledge, because I've seen there are progressive intellectuals in the West against not progressive intellectuals. And now I think with the social media, we see how that conspiracy theory also happened in the Western country, where Indonesians often say, well, they're more educated than us, right? They're as a society. But no, it's happening the same. Right? So that's why, in my opinion, the division of the way they divide is not about West and South, East and West, but about this: who are the progressive intellectuals, and who are the intellectuals that, everybody say, that create problems, not only in their country, but of course outside countries. How these different intellectuals collaborate with capital, with people that actually focus on increase the wealth for a certain group, and then create problem, which is inequality, discrimination, and things like that. So, in my opinion, the divisions of the globe, division on it's not about West and South, but about this group of people, because this group of people who come that work with the oligarch Indonesia, and the non-progressive intellectual, support the progress and support the authoritarian government against the progressive intellectuals, like in Indonesia, work with the progressive intellectual in the West. And also the effect of each country are the same. In the US, I know inequality is on the rise. The gap between the rich and the poor is huge now, including in Indonesia. So instead of see West, South, East, West, I think the best collaboration is to work with progressive everywhere. Progressive in Indonesia, progressive outside Indonesia. Because that collaboration actually create something that open up our understanding about, I agree with the banana structure culture barriers in Indonesia and in other places as well. So I think instead of talking about conspiracy theory, which is now, I'm afraid, in the current government, they're trying to portray NGO or scholar who work with the Western collaborators are the one who actually ruin Indonesia. The reason they really like that, because they want to frame that we are best, and then oligarch and state authoritarian is not a problem in Indonesia. So this is something that I think we have to open up the discussion, not to divide it between West and South, East and West, but between who are the progressive, who they support, what kind of politician they support, what kind of ideas, social justice they support. So I think a lot of question is, in my opinion, in Indonesia, have to be critical about that. So we have to be open to critical thought and paradigm and ideology with people everywhere in the world, rather than saying the Indonesians who work, collaborate with Indonesian and outside Indonesia are the one who actually rape Indonesia. So I think we need to open up that thinking about critical thinking against conspiracy theory. I totally agree.
Okay, thank you very much, Bu Suraya. Now we have finished all the session from presentation and discussion, and I try to make a short notes from our activity today. I think we have already get many excellent insight from the speakers. So intellectuals still playing a role in and contributing to the global polycrisis. And then to moving forward, the intellectuals need to have the capacity to make collaboration and also autonomous in thoughts, like Professor Connell said, and also autonomous in action, like Professor Rino mentioned, including 4 action that we have to take, mentioned by Mbak Nana. However, as Bu Suraya mentioned, there are many barriers that you are facing, and that are collective challenge for all of us, including all participants in this forum, or whoever we call intellectuals. So that is our challenge for the near future. So we have finished the discussion session. Thank you very much to all speakers, Professor Raewyn Connell, Professor Joshua Rino, Kamala Chandrakirana MA, and Dr. Suraya Afid for joining us. Also to the audience and all participants of this public forum, thank you very much for being a wonderful participant during this session. We turn back to the host, Mbak Ira. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Bang Zul, for the wonderful and fruitful discussion. Thank you for all the distinguished speakers today, for the thought-provoking and your insight. Well, we apologize on behalf of the organizer team, because we only have like 2 hours for today's discussion. Actually, it's not enough for us to discuss this such an important topic, such as like Professor Connell said, like it needs like not 6 minutes, but 6 days. Yes, but we have like a barrier here in which we have like different time zones. We know that Professor Reno is in New York, and now it's like really late at 10:30 p.m. in New York. So we apologize, but we really hope that we have continuous reflection and critical thinking, or critical mind, as Mbak Nana and other speakers already told us. Just a quick announcement that please follow Let's Talk social media, connect with us on social media for our following or next agenda or programs, because we are going to celebrate the 16 days of activism or campaign on anti-gender-based violence, and we're gonna have like some programs or agenda, and also we will have the feminist speech and the New Year concert during the New Year later for celebration. And also we will be having some different programs and interesting programs. So thank you so much for the interpreters, Mas Denny, Yatim, dan Mbak Aida Milasari. Thank you so much for your help. So it's accessible for Indonesian language. And please allow me to end our wonderful discussion. Unfortunately, we have to end it here. Thank you so much again for all the participants or all the audience, and I'll see you next time. Bye-bye. Thank you. Have a good one.